They called him Ricky Schoolboy McMillan, a 20-year-old replacement pilot with a face so fresh the ground crew asked if he'd lied about his age. He touched down at Leiston Airfield on a frostbitter morning in February 1945, his combat logbook blank except for training hours, his P-51 Mustang still wearing factory paint. The 357th Fighter Group's operations officer took one look at those wide, unweathered eyes and muttered a quiet prayer. The armorers loading his guns shook their heads. Within 4 hours, he would be 400 miles deep over Germany, boxed in by 12 Focke-Wulf 190s with his flight scattered and no one listening on the radio. The briefing room had smelled of burnt coffee and old cigarettes. Ricky sat in the back row, trying to memorize the turning points on the map, Stuttgart, then Nuremberg, then back through the Bavarian corridor. The veteran pilots barely glanced his way. He was furniture. Replacements arrived weekly, half never made it through their first month. Now, at 28,000 feet, that indifference felt like prophecy. The Merlin engine thrummed its mechanical heartbeat, the only sound louder than Ricky's own breathing inside the oxygen mask. He checked his gloved hands on the stick, steady enough, though his stomach churned with the altitude and the weight of being the squadron's newest liability. Then the sun glinted wrong. Not clouds. Not contrails. Silhouettes. 12 of them, peeling down from the high perch like wolves spotting a separated lamb. Yellow noses. Focke-Wulf 190s. Ricky's throat tightened as he craned his neck, searching desperately for his flight lead. Static. Empty sky. He was alone. The first traces stitched past his canopy, bright and impossibly fast, and he realized with crystalline clarity, they weren't just attacking him. They were hunting him. And they thought it would be easy. The plexiglass canopy made for a poor mirror, but it was enough. Ricky caught his reflection in the curved glass as the ground crew finished fueling his Mustang. The same face that had gotten him waved through as too young at 3 different bars in London, the same soft jawline that made the flight surgeon do a double take when checking his papers. 20 years old, but he could pass for 17 in the right light. Or the wrong light. He touched his oxygen mask, still hanging loose around his neck, and wondered if his father had looked this young when he'd shipped out to France in the last war. Probably not. His father had possessed a hardness even in the old photographs, a set to his shoulders that said he belonged in uniform. Ricky just looked like someone playing dress-up in borrowed leather and sheepskin. "You good, Lieutenant?" The crew chief's voice snapped him back. The man was 40-ish, with grease permanently embedded in the creases of his hands, the kind of man who'd seen 100 pilots come and go. "Yeah. Good." The words came out thinner than Ricky intended. The crew chief nodded, but his eyes told a different story. He'd bolted down this same aircraft for a pilot named Henderson 3 weeks ago. Henderson hadn't come back. Now here was another green kid, still smelling of stateside aftershave, about to strap into a machine that would take him deep into the teeth of the WWII. Ricky climbed onto the wing, each movement mechanical, rehearsed. He'd done this 100 times in training. Pre-flight check, harness straps, radio leads, oxygen connection. His hands knew the choreography even if his heart was hammering against his ribs like it wanted out. He settled into the cockpit and caught his reflection again in the rearview mirror mounted above the instrument panel. There were those eyes again, too wide, too uncertain. This was supposed to be the moment where he felt transformed, where the machine made him into something more than a scared kid from Nebraska. But sitting there, surrounded by toggle switches and gun sights and the metallic smell of aviation fuel, he just felt small. The other pilots were already firing up their engines down the line. Veterans. Men with kill marks painted beneath their canopies, men who moved through pre-flight with the casual confidence of repetition. Men who belonged here. Ricky pressed the primer, hit the starter. The Merlin coughed, sputtered, then roared to life with a violence that rattled his bones. The whole aircraft shuddered beneath him, 1,200 horsepower straining against the brakes. He looked one more time at that reflection in the curved glass. Still the same face. Still too young, too soft, too uncertain. But the mission didn't care about any of that. In 15 minutes, he'd be wheels up and pointed east, toward a sky full of people who very much wanted him dead. Ready or not. The cold came through everything. Through the sheepskin jacket, through the leather gloves, through the fleece-lined boots. At 28,000 feet, the thermometer read 40 below zero, and the heating system in the Mustang did little more than keep the instruments from freezing solid. Ricky's breath condensed inside his oxygen mask, tiny crystals of ice forming on the rubber where his exhalations met the thin air whistling through the regulator. He'd been flying for 90 minutes now, the English Channel a distant memory somewhere behind the curve of the Earth. Below, Germany scrolled past in patches of winter brown and dirty white, fields, forests, the occasional town reduced to a collection of gray squares. From this height, it looked peaceful. Abstract. Like studying a map in the briefing room instead of flying over a country filled with people who would celebrate his death. The formation had tightened up after crossing the Rhine. 16 Mustangs in tight finger four elements, their polished aluminum skins catching the sun like schools of fish moving through an ocean of nothing. Ricky held his position off the flight lead's right wing, constantly adjusting throttle, making tiny corrections with the stick. His arms ached from the concentration. The veterans made it look effortless. The oxygen mask pressed against his face like a parasite, the straps cutting into the back of his head. Each breath was work, the thin air at altitude forcing him to suck harder on the rubber nipple of the regulator. He could taste it, that distinct metallic rubber flavor mixed with the pure oxygen. His throat was already raw from it, and they still had the entire mission ahead. Another 2 hours, maybe 3 if they ran into trouble. The radio crackled with brief, clipped transmissions. Call signs. Headings. Altitude checks. The voices were calm, professional, robotic. They could have been discussing the weather instead of penetrating 400 miles into the most heavily defended airspace in the world. Ricky glanced down at his navigation log strapped to his thigh. They were over Stuttgart now, or near enough. That meant another hour to the target area, then the turn for home, if they made it that far. He tried not to think about the distance. About how far Nebraska felt from this frozen cockpit. About how his mother had looked when he'd left, standing on the platform at Union Station with that brittle smile that said she was already imagining the telegram. The sun was high and brutal, glaring off the canopy, but it provided no warmth. Just light. Just the harsh illumination of exactly how alone each of them was up here, sealed in our individual glass and metal coffins, hurtling through a sky that would kill them as readily as any German gun. His wingman, Carter, a veteran with 11 missions, waggled his wings slightly. A reminder to stay tight. Ricky adjusted, closed the gap to 50 feet. Still an hour to go. Still so far from anything resembling safety. Ricky saw them first as imperfections in his vision, tiny specks at 2 o'clock high that might have been dirt on the canopy or floaters in his eye. He blinked hard, refocused. The specks were still there, and they were moving. His hand went to the radio transmit button, then hesitated. The veterans hated jumpy rookies calling out every contrail and cloud shadow. He'd been warned about that his first day. Cry wolf too many times and they'd stop listening when it mattered. But the specks were growing. Slowly at first, then faster. Resolving into shapes with dimension, wings, fuselages, the distinctive blunt nose of radial engines. His stomach dropped. Bandits, 2 o'clock high. Carter's voice cut through the radio, sharp and elevated. No longer the casual professional tone. Count 12, no, more, FW-190s coming down. The formation exploded into motion. The lead element broke hard left, peeling away in a climbing turn. Ricky's flight was supposed to follow, but everything happened too fast. One moment they were cruising in neat formation, the next the sky was full of geometry and violence. Someone's Mustang flashed past Ricky's nose, missing him by feet. He yanked the stick, braking right instead of left, his heart slamming against his ribs. The German fighters came down like hawks on pigeons. Ricky had seen gun camera footage in training, grainy black and white film that made combat look slow and methodical. This was nothing like that. The FW-190s materialized out of the sun's glare, growing from dots to full-sized aircraft in seconds that felt like heartbeats. He could see details now, the yellow-painted nose cones that marked them as veterans, the dark crosses on their wings, even the glint of canopy glass. Brake! Brake right! Someone screamed over the radio, But Ricky was already turning, hauling the stick into his lap, the G-force pressing him down into his seat like a giant hand. His vision grayed at the edges. The horizon spun. When he leveled out, gasping against the oxygen mask, the neat formation was gone. The sky had become a scattered mess of twisting contrails and distant aircraft. He craned his neck, searching desperately for his element, for Carter, for anyone with American markings. Nothing. Just empty blue sky in every direction he looked. Then he checked behind and above, the 6 o'clock high position, the killer's perch, and felt his blood turn to ice water. They were still there. Not the full 12 anymore, but enough. 9 of them, stacked in a loose gaggle, bright yellow noses pointed down at him like accusatory fingers. And they were closing. Not diving in for a slashing attack, but methodically, deliberately, like they had all the time in the world. Like they knew he was alone. Like they knew exactly what they had. Ricky slammed the throttle forward and broke left, pulling hard into the turn. The Mustang responded instantly, wings biting into the thin air, but when he rolled out and checked 6, the yellow noses were still there. Closer now. They hadn't followed his turn, they'd cut across the circle, anticipating it. He tried the opposite. Hard right brake, then immediately reversing back left. A scissors maneuver, straight from the training manual. It should have forced at least one of them to overshoot. But the German formation simply split, 3 peeling off to each side like they'd rehearsed this exact scenario. They weren't chasing him. They were channeling him. The altimeter unwound as Ricky pushed the nose down, trading altitude for speed. 26,000 feet. 24. The airspeed indicator climbed past 300 knots, the Mustang's frame beginning to shudder with the strain. Surely they couldn't follow this. The FW-190 was a good aircraft, but the Mustang owned the high-speed regime. Except they were following. Not matching his dive exactly, but staying above and behind, controlling the engagement. Every time Ricky tried to level out or turn, tracers would arc lazily through the space ahead of him, not trying to hit, just reminding him which directions were closed off. Herding him like a sheep toward slaughter. 20,000 feet. Ricky pulled back on the stick, trying to convert his speed into a climbing turn. The G-forces crushed him into his seat, his vision tunneling to a narrow gray circle. The Mustang clawed upward, engine screaming. For a moment he thought he'd done it, thought he'd found a gap in their coverage. Then 2 of them appeared directly ahead, head-on, and Ricky had to throw the stick sideways to avoid a collision. His climb died. Speed bled off. And when he rolled level again, shaking, they'd repositioned around him like pieces on a chessboard. He tried a split S, rolling inverted and pulling through into a dive. They followed. He tried a climbing spiral. They countered. He tried jinking randomly, throwing the Mustang into unpredictable bursts of turns and rolls. It didn't matter. There were 9 of them and 1 of him, and they'd done this before. Probably dozens of times. Every move he made, they had an answer for. 18,000 feet now. The German lead hadn't fired a serious burst yet. None of them had. This wasn't about killing him quickly, it was about demonstrating complete control. About showing him that every option led to the same conclusion. Ricky's breathing came in ragged gasps inside the oxygen mask. His arms burned from fighting the stick. Sweat ran down his back despite the cold. The textbook was empty. He'd tried everything they taught him, and the 9 yellow noses were still there, patient and inevitable, pushing him steadily lower and further from any hope of friendly aircraft. They owned him, and they knew it. The radio had been crackling with static for the last minute, the familiar American voices fading in and out like a dying signal. Then it happened, a hard pop in his headset, followed by a squelch, and suddenly Ricky was hearing something else entirely. German. Clear as day, bleeding through on his frequency. Asterisk said Jung, Dizet asterisk. The voice was casual, almost amused. Very young, this one. Another voice, deeper, responded with something Ricky couldn't quite catch. Then laughter. Actual laughter, coming through his headset while he was fighting for his life at 16,000 feet. Asterisk Wien Hayes. Arendt, aber wohin? Asterisk like a rabbit. He runs, but where to? Ricky's hands tightened on the stick. His college German was limited, 2 semesters before he'd enlisted, but he understood enough. They weren't even using tactical brevity. They were having a conversation about him, relaxed and confident, like discussing a training exercise. He tried switching channels, but the bleed-through followed him. Some quirk of the radios, some atmospheric condition at this altitude, had married his frequency to theirs. He was trapped listening to his own execution being discussed. Der Amerikaner ist allein dat the American is alone. JA. Kein Hilfe kommt dat yes. No help is coming. More laughter. One of them said something about a baby face, Kindergesicht and Ricky felt his cheeks burn despite the cold. They'd seen him. Gotten close enough during one of the passes to actually look at him through the canopy. Close enough to see how young he was, how scared. He threw the Mustang into another desperate turn, hauling back on the stick until the airframe groaned. The G-forces crushed him down, his vision graying, but when he rolled out they were still there. Still positioned perfectly. Still talking. Soll ich in Jets toten? Should I kill him now? A pause. Then the deeper voice again, calm and measured, nein. Lass ihn noch ein bisschen tanzen no. Let him dance a little more. They were playing with him. 9 veteran pilots, each with kills painted on their fuselages, treating this like sport. Like entertainment. The rabbit comment made sickening sense now, they were enjoying the chase more than the kill. Ricky's breathing was ragged inside the oxygen mask, each inhalation a conscious effort. 14,000 feet. The altimeter kept unwinding. They'd pushed him down from 28,000 in less than 10 minutes, and his fuel gauge was dropping toward the red. Even if he escaped, and that seemed laughable now, he might not have enough to make it home. Ball that soon, one of them said. The radio crackled again, and for a moment Ricky thought he heard an American voice trying to break through. Carter maybe, or the flight lead. But then it was swallowed by static and more German, the words blending into a soundtrack of his own helplessness. They weren't even worried about giving away their positions. That's how thoroughly they owned this fight. 12,000 feet. The altimeter kept unwinding, each 100-foot loss feeling like another nail in his coffin. Ricky's mind raced through options, discarding each one as quickly as it formed. Every standard maneuver was a dead end. Every textbook escape had already failed. Then something flickered at the edge of his memory, not from combat training, but from a lecture back at Victorville. A civilian engineer from North American Aviation, brought in to talk about the Mustang's design characteristics. Most of the pilots had been half asleep, bored by technical specifications and wind tunnel data. But Ricky remembered the man's excitement when he discussed the laminar flow wing. How the P-51's unique airfoil allowed it to slip through the air with less drag than any fighter in existence. How it could reach speeds that would tear other aircraft apart. She'll go faster than anything the Germans have the engineer had said, his eyes bright with pride. The limitation isn't the wing, it's the propeller. Past 0.75 Mach, you'll hit compressibility. The controls get mushy, then they lock up entirely. Most pilots who go there don't come back. Someone had asked, so why design it to go that fast? The engineer had smiled. Because someday, someone might need to. Ricky's hands were shaking on the stick, but his mind suddenly felt crystalline and clear. The Germans were hurting him, controlling every axis of movement, except one. They were keeping him from climbing, from turning effectively, from running away level. But they weren't stopping him from diving. They were actually pushing him lower, confident that eventually he'd run out of altitude and options. They didn't know he was about to stop running. Sieht zu enden one of the German voices said through the static. Time to finish this. Ricky reached down and pushed the throttle through the wire, past the mechanical stop into war emergency power. The Merlin engine's pitch changed, becoming a higher, more violent scream. 1,200 horsepower became 1,500. The Mustang surged forward. Then he did something no sane pilot would do with 9 enemy fighters on his tail. He rolled inverted, pulled the stick into his lap, and pointed the nose straight down toward the earth. The airspeed indicator began climbing immediately. 320. 340. The Mustang accelerated like it had been kicked by God. Ricky kept the throttle mashed forward, kept the nose pointed down into the vertical. His stomach lurched into his throat. The wind noise became a shriek. 360 knots. 380. 400. Behind him, he knew the FW-190s would be following. They had to, letting him escape would be humiliating. But they were following into a realm where the Mustang was designed to go and their radial engine fighters were not. Ricky was done being the rabbit. He was about to become something the Germans had never seen before, a pilot willing to bet his life on physics. 420 knots. The Mustang punched through the air like a bullet, the wind noise rising to a banshee howl that drowned out even the Merlin's scream. Ricky's body felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, pressed back into the seat by forces his training had never prepared him for. His vision narrowed to a tunnel, blood draining from his head despite every muscle in his body clenched tight. The earth rushed up with terrifying speed. Fields and forests resolved into individual features, roads, buildings, the snake-like curve of a river. 440 knots. 460. The airspeed indicator's needle climbed past the red line and kept going into unmarked territory. The stick began to feel wrong in his hands. Not responding the way it should. A mushiness crept into the controls, like moving the stick through mud. Compressibility. The shockwaves forming over the wings as he approached the speed of sound. Ricky's arms screamed with the effort of holding the aircraft steady, fighting against forces that wanted to tear the Mustang into tumbling pieces. Behind him, though he couldn't look, couldn't move his head against the G-forces, he knew the FW-190s had followed. They had to. 9 veteran pilots wouldn't let a rookie embarrass them by simply running away. 480 knots. The control stick went almost completely dead. Ricky could move it, but nothing happened. The elevator was locked in place by the air pressure, the Mustang committed to its vertical plunge whether he wanted it or not. This was the edge the engineer had warned about. The place where pilots died. The altimeter spun backward like a broken watch. 8,000 feet. 7,000. The gray-green German countryside filled his entire windscreen. He could see individual trees now, the geometric patterns of plowed fields, a farmer's wagon on a dirt road. His body felt like it was being crushed. 6 gs, maybe more. His chest couldn't expand properly against the pressure. Each breath was a battle. Sweat poured down his face inside the oxygen mask despite the cold, mixing with the condensation, half blinding him. 6,000 feet. 5,000. And then, filtering through the roar in his own ragged breathing, Ricky heard it over the radio, a voice screaming in German. Not the calm, mocking tones from before. This was panic, raw and unfiltered. Abbrechen. Abbrechen, abort. Abort. Another voice, higher-pitched, nearly hysterical, main controllen. Ich kann nicht, my controls. I can't. The transmission cut off into static. 4,000 feet. The stick began responding again, marginally. The Mustang was slowing as the denser air at low altitude created drag, pulling him back from the edge of compressibility. Ricky's arms felt like dead weights, but he forced them to move, pulling back on the stick with everything he had. 3,000 feet. Pull. Pull harder. The horizon slowly began to rise. The radio exploded with German voices, all semblance of professional calm shattered. They weren't talking to each other anymore, they were screaming. Asterisk ist zu schnell, asterisk is too fast. Asterisk ich verliere, asterisk I'm losing. A metallic tearing sound cut through the transmission, followed by silence. One of them was gone. Just gone. Ripped apart by forces their aircraft couldn't withstand. Ricky fought the stick, every muscle in his arms and back straining against the G-forces as he pulled out of the dive. 2,000 feet. The Mustang's nose inched upward, degree by agonizing degree. His vision was almost completely grayed out, a narrow tunnel of sight surrounded by encroaching darkness. If he blacked out now, he'd auger straight into German soil at 500 miles per hour. Abbrechen. 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 The deeper voice, the calm one who'd talked about letting him dance, was no longer calm. There was an edge of terror in it now, a recognition that the rabbit had led them into a trap of physics and engineering tolerances. Another voice, breaking up, mein Flügel, die Verkleidung, my wing, the fairing. Static. Then nothing. 2 down. Or maybe they'd pulled out. Maybe they'd recognized the danger before their airframes failed and had aborted the dive while they still could. But Ricky knew the truth. Veteran pride was a powerful thing. They'd followed him because they couldn't imagine a scenario where a rookie could do something they couldn't match. The Mustang shuddered violently as it transitioned from the vertical dive to level flight. 1,500 feet. The pressure eased slightly, blood returning to Ricky's head in a rush that made his vision swim. He gasped against the oxygen mask, his lungs burning, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. The ground flashed beneath him, a village, gone in a blink. A church steeple that he missed by what felt like inches. Then he was skimming over a valley, the Mustang barely 50 feet off the deck, trailing a rooster tail of disturbed air. Behind him, the radio had gone quiet except for one transmission. The deep voice, now hoarse and defeated, *erst weg that asterisk is gone. Ricky banked hard left, pulling into a narrow ravine where morning mist still clung to the ground. The Mustang disappeared into the white, swallowed by the low-lying fog that pooled in the German valleys. His silver wings vanished into gray nothing, the Merlin's roar muffled and distant sounding in the thick air. He stayed low, following the contours of the land, invisible. The radio crackled with more German, confused now, searching. They'd lost him. 9 fighters hunting 1 Mustang, and he'd simply vanished into the mist like a ghost. Like something that had never been there at all. The fuel gauge read just above empty when Ricky finally crossed back over the channel. He'd stayed on the deck for nearly 2 hours, navigating by dead reckoning and praying his compass wasn't off by more than a few degrees. The mist had eventually given way to French countryside, then the scarred beaches of Normandy, then finally the gray-green water that meant safety. His hands had stopped shaking somewhere over Belgium, replaced by a numbness that ran from his shoulders to his fingertips. The adrenaline had long since drained away, leaving only exhaustion so profound he had to consciously remind himself to scan the sky, to check his instruments, to keep flying. Leiston appeared through the haze like a mirage, the familiar grid of runways, the scattered hardstands, the control tower standing watch over it all. Ricky clicked his radio to the tower frequency, his voice sounding strange and distant in his own ears. Leiston Tower, Ranger 2-4, requesting landing. A pause. Then, 2-4, say again? We have you marked as, another pause, longer this time. Jesus. 2-4, you're cleared to land, any runway. Welcome home. The Mustang touched down with barely a chirp of rubber. Ricky had nothing left for a smooth landing. He simply pointed the nose at the concrete and let gravity finish the job. The tail settled, and he rolled out, turning off toward the hardstand where his crew chief was already running toward him, waving his arms. Other ground crew were gathering too, mechanics and armors abandoning their work to watch. Word traveled fast on an airfield. The pilot everyone thought was dead was taxiing in. Ricky shut down the engine, the Merlin coughing twice before falling silent. The sudden quiet was overwhelming. No wind noise, no engine roar, just the tick of cooling metal and his own ragged breathing. He sat there for a moment, unable to move, staring at his hands still gripping the stick. The crew chief climbed up on the wing, yanked open the canopy. "Lieutenant, you okay?" "Sir, we thought, the flight lead said you were." "I'm fine." Ricky's voice came out flat, empty. He unbuckled his harness with numb fingers, pulled off his oxygen mask. His face was raw where the rubber had pressed against his skin for 4 hours. He climbed out slowly, legs almost buckling when his boots hit the wing. The crew chief steadied him, but Ricky waved him off. He could stand. He would stand. The other pilots were emerging from the operations building now. Carter. The flight lead. The squadron commander. They stared at him like he was a ghost made flesh. Ricky pulled off his helmet, ran a hand through sweat-soaked hair. Someone would want a debrief. Someone would want to know what happened. But not yet. He looked back at his Mustang, scorched paint around the exhaust stacks, oil streaks on the cowling, but intact. Still whole. Like him. The rookie who'd climbed into that cockpit this morning was gone. The man who climbed out was someone else entirely.